In April 2012, a small group of skydivers jumped out of a blimp above San Francisco, live streaming their descent through cameras built into the frames of the glasses they were wearing. They landed on the roof of the Moscone Center, where Google's annual developer conference was underway, and within minutes, footage of the jump, filmed entirely from the skydiver's point of view, was playing on the big screen inside. The audience lost its mind. It was, by any measure, one of the most audacious product reveals in tech history. The product was Google Glass, and for about 18 months, it was treated as the future. Then something strange happened. The more people actually saw glass being worn in restaurants, bars, and bathrooms, the less they liked it. And the company that had built one of the most technically impressive wearable devices ever made found itself facing something no engineering team could patch. It had built a product that made the people around its users deeply uncomfortable, and it hadn't seen that coming at all. So what was it? Google Glass was mechanically remarkable. It was a lightweight titanium frame with a small transparent display positioned above the right eye, a built-in camera, a bone conduction speaker that transmitted sound through your skull instead of your ears, and enough processing power to run a simplified version of Android. You could take a photo by winking. You could get turn-by-turn directions projected into your field of view. You could dictate a text message, check the weather, or start a video call, all without touching a phone. The vision behind it, championed by Google co-founder Sergey Brin personally, was about removing the friction between a person and their information. No more looking down at a screen, no more missing the world around you because you were staring at a rectangle in your palm. Brin reportedly hated how absorbed people had become in their phones, and Glass was pitched internally as a genuine cure for that. Google began selling early units in 2013 through something called the Explorer program, essentially a public beta, priced at $1,500, available only to people who applied and were accepted, or who knew someone already in the program. It was less a product launch than an invitation into an exclusive, expensive club of early adopters, developers, and journalists. So what went wrong? The problem wasn't that Glass didn't work. Mostly it did. The problem was what it represented to everyone standing near a person wearing it. That small camera built into the frame meant that, in theory, a person wearing Glass could be recording you at any moment, in a bar, in a locker room, in a private conversation, without your knowledge or consent. There was no obvious light or indicator most bystanders would recognize as this device is filming. Even when Glass wasn't recording, there was no way for the person next to you to know that for certain, and that ambiguity turned out to be corrosive to public trust in a way Google's engineers hadn't fully modelled. Within months, the backlash had a name. Glasshole entered the cultural vocabulary, a shorthand for a glass wearer, someone so absorbed in their gadget and so oblivious to how it made others feel that public spaces started pushing back directly. Bars in Seattle banned the device outright. A woman in San Francisco reported being assaulted after other bar patrons tried to physically remove her glass over privacy concerns. Some businesses posted signs reading "Google Glass is banned" alongside no smoking notices. Casinos worried about cheating. Movie theatres worried about piracy. Strip clubs, unsurprisingly, banned it immediately. Congress sent Google a formal letter in 2013 asking pointed questions about how the company planned to protect user and bystander privacy. None of this was really about the technology failing to function. It was about a fundamental miscalculation in how a wearable camera, would land in a culture that had spent years growing increasingly anxious about surveillance, data privacy, and being recorded without consent. Google had built a product optimized entirely around the wearer's convenience and largely ignored the psychological experience of everyone else in the room. There was also a much simpler issue sitting underneath all of this. Glass looked strange, and people didn't want to look strange in public. Wearable technology has always had to clear a bar that other consumer electronics don't. It has to be something people are willing to put on their own body in front of other people all day. A phone lives in your pocket. Glass lived on your face, permanently visible, instantly recognizable, and impossible to hide. Early reviewers and cultural commentators repeatedly zeroed in on this. Glass didn't just do something unusual, it made you look like you were doing something unusual. And that visual signal alone made a huge number of otherwise curious early adopters unwilling to actually wear it outside a tech conference. Google leaned into fashion partnerships to try to solve this, collaborating with prescription eyewear designers, releasing different frame styles, even working with a well-known sunglasses brand to make glass look less like a lab prototype and more like something a person might reasonably choose to wear. It helped a little. It didn't fix the underlying problem, which was that the device's core function, a visible camera aimed outward from your face at all times, was never going to be something most people found socially comfortable, no matter how the frame was styled. By January 2015, less than 2 years after Explorer units first shipped, Google quietly pulled the plug on the consumer version of Glass. The company folded the Glass team into a broader division and stopped selling the Explorer edition to the public. Google was characteristically careful about how it framed this, insisting Glass wasn't dead, just graduating from an experimental Google X project into a more focused product effort. That reframing turned out to be more accurate than it sounded at the time. Google didn't actually abandon the underlying technology. It repositioned it entirely, away from consumers and toward the workplace. Glass Enterprise Edition launched a few years later, aimed squarely at industries where hands-free access to information has obvious, uncontroversial value. Factory workers following assembly instructions, warehouse pickers checking inventory, surgeons reviewing patient data mid-procedure. In those settings, nobody's worried about being secretly filmed at a bar. The device is a sanctioned, expected part of a specific job, worn by people who opted in front of colleagues who understood exactly why. In other words, the same hardware that flopped as a consumer lifestyle product quietly found a real, sustainable niche once Google stopped trying to sell it to everyone and started selling it to the narrow set of people who actually had a defined problem it solved. Google has never published precise figures on how much money it spent developing and marketing Glass, but conservative outside estimates from analysts covering the project at the time put total investment somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars, factoring in years of R&D, the Explorer rollout, marketing, and the fashion partnerships. For a company the size of Google, that's a rounding error on the balance sheet, but the reputational cost was arguably larger. Glass became one of the most widely cited case studies in business schools and product design courses for a specific kind of failure. A technically brilliant product that nobody bothered to stress test against the messy, unpredictable reality of how humans actually behave around each other in public. The thing that makes Glass such an interesting failure compared to something like a product that simply didn't work is that the engineering was never really the problem. Glass mostly did what it promised to do. What it failed to account for was social permission, the invisible, collectively negotiated sense of what's acceptable to do around other people in public. Google had assumed that if the technology was impressive enough, people would adapt their social norms to make room for it. Instead, the opposite happened. Society decided fairly quickly and fairly harshly that this was one piece of convenience it wasn't willing to trade its sense of privacy for. It's a mistake companies keep making in slightly different forms, building for what a device can do and skipping the harder question of what it will feel like to be standing next to someone using it. But at least Google survived its mistake. Next time, we look at a company that had the exact winning move sitting on the table, in writing, for less than the price of a Manhattan apartment, and said, no. That's how Blockbuster died.